The forest screamed. David Reed heard it through the hull of his cargo hauler as he unloaded supply crates at the mining settlement. Not a sound exactly, more like a feeling that crawled up his spine and made his hands stop moving. Something was wrong out there in the dense woods of Terravon, that he had learned to trust those feelings during his years as a wildlife conservationist back on Earth. Before the galaxy opened up, and he decided a quiet life running supplies between frontier outposts was exactly what he needed. No drama, no danger, just him, his ship, and the endless routes through space. The feeling got stronger. David looked at the miners waiting for their equipment. They were busy arguing about proper installation techniques and hadn't noticed him freeze. He could finish the delivery, collect his payment, and leave. That was the smart choice. The safe choice. Another pulse of wrongness hit him, and this time he heard something real. A high-pitched cry, thin and desperate, coming from beyond the tree line. He was running before he made the conscious decision to move. The miners shouted behind him, but David ignored them. His boots hit the soft ground of the forest, and he pushed through the undergrowth, following instinct more than sound. Branches whipped his face. His breath came hard. The cry came again, weaker this time, and David changed direction. He found the clearing and stopped dead. A creature the size of a large cat hung in a metal snare, its body twisted at an awful angle. Scales covered its small form, shifting colors between bronze and copper as it struggled. Wings, delicate and torn, beat uselessly against the trap. Blood dripped from where the wire cut into its leg. A dragon. A baby dragon. David had seen pictures in the information databases, heard stories from other traders. Skyborn dragons were supposed to be extinct, wiped out centuries ago in wars nobody talked about anymore. Yet here one was, dying in front of him. The hatchling saw him and made a sound between a hiss and a whimper. Its eyes were golden, too intelligent for something so young, and filled with terror. "Easy," David whispered, moving slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." A mechanical were cut through the air. David's head snapped up. 300 drones emerged from the trees, their sensors glowing red as they scanned the clearing. Automated kill machines, programmed to track and capture. Illegal on most worlds, but out here on the frontier, laws were suggestions. The drones locked onto the hatchling. Weapons charged with an electric hum. David moved without thinking. He grabbed a fallen branch and hurled it at the nearest drone, disrupting its targeting. The machine recalibrated, now focusing on him as a threat. Good. That was what he wanted. He pulled the cutting tool from his belt and lunged for the snare. The wire was tough, designed to hold struggling prey. The hatchling thrashed, making it harder, but David wrapped his other arm around the small body. "Stop fighting me," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm trying to help." The dragon went still, not limp, but controlled as if it understood. Its golden eyes met his, and David felt something shift in his chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the humid air. The wire snapped. David scooped up the hatchling and ran. The drones fired. Energy bolts scorched the ground where he had been standing. David zigzagged through the trees, using every trick he remembered from his conservation days when he had to avoid poachers. The hatchling tucked itself against his chest, surprisingly trusting for a creature that had just been trapped. His ship sat 200 meters away across open ground. The drones would cut him down before he made it halfway. David veered toward the mining equipment instead. Heavy loaders and excavators sat idle, waiting for the next shift. He ducked behind a massive dirt hauler and pulled the thermal blanket from his emergency pack. The hatchling was shaking now, going into shock from pain and fear. "You're okay," David murmured, wrapping the small body carefully. "I've got you." The drones swept the area. David triggered the dirt hauler's ignition remotely using his universal key. The engine roared to life, and the machines immediately targeted the larger heat signature. While they were distracted, David sprinted for his ship. The cargo bay door responded to his touch. He was inside and hitting the emergency launch before the drones recalculated. The ship lifted with a lurch that sent unsecured crates sliding. David didn't care. He punched the coordinates for orbit and only breathed when the atmosphere fell away below them. The hatchling made a small sound, David looked down at the bundle in his arms. The thermal blanket had fallen partially open, revealing torn wings and that awful wound on the leg. But the dragon was alive, its chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. He carried it to his personal quarters and laid it gently on the bunk. The medical supplies he kept for himself would have to work. David cleaned the wound with steady hands, applied synthetic skin to cover the damage, and splinted the wing as carefully as possible. The hatchling watched him through half-closed eyes. When David finished, it made a sound like a purr mixed with distant thunder. A small tongue, bright blue, licked his hand. "What am I going to do with you?" David asked softly. His datapad chimed. He pulled up the message, and his stomach dropped. An alert from the Galactic Council database, triggered by his ship's scanner. Species identification confirmed. Skyborn dragon. Hatchling age. Critically endangered and protected under Council law. Unauthorized contact prohibited. Penalties included imprisonment or worse. David looked at the tiny dragon on his bunk. It had curled into a ball, trusting him completely despite every reason not to. The warmth in his chest grew stronger, spreading through his body like liquid sunlight. "Yeah," he said, "I'm already in trouble." The hatchling's scales shimmered, and for just a moment, David could have sworn they glowed with inner light. His own skin tingled in response, and he noticed faint bronze patterns appearing on his forearms. Something impossible was happening. Something that had not happened in 1,000 years. But David Reed had never been good at walking away from creatures that needed help. 3 days of running changed a man. David checked his fuel reserve for the 5th time in an hour and got the same bad news. Half empty and dropping fast. The hatchling he had started calling Bronze was curled up in the co-pilot's seat, watching him with those unsettling golden eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. The wound on the dragon's leg was healing impossibly fast. The wings were still delicate, but no longer torn. Bronze had grown too, now the size of a medium dog instead of a cat. Every time David looked away and looked back, the dragon seemed slightly bigger. His datapad buzzed with another incoming message. David ignored it like he had ignored the previous 47. They were all the same. Demands to surrender the protected species. Threats of legal action. Promises of leniency if he complied immediately. He deleted them all. What bothered him more were the messages from his underground contacts. People who lived in the gray spaces between legal and illegal, who heard things that never made it to official channels. They all said the same thing. Hunters were coming. Real ones this time, not just automated drones. Rindix Cole and his crew. David had heard of Cole. Everyone in the shipping business had. The man was a legend in the worst possible way. He specialized in rare species, the kind that were protected by every law in the galaxy and worth a fortune on the black market. Because of it, if Cole was coming, it meant someone had put a price on Bronze that made it worth his time. The ship's scanner beeped. David's hands moved across the controls, pulling up the readings. 3 vessels had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel behind him. Military-grade engines. Heavy weapons signatures. They were not even trying to hide. "We've got company," David said. Bronze chirped, a sound like metal chimes in wind. David changed course, heading for a nearby asteroid field. It was dangerous, but Cole's ships were bigger and less maneuverable. The field might give him a chance. Might being the key word. Bronze stood up in the seat, balance perfect despite the ship's movement. The dragon's head tilted, looking at something David could not see. Then Bronze made a sound, urgent and insistent, and images flooded David's mind. Turn left. Drop 20 degrees. Accelerate now. David's hands moved before his brain caught up. The ship dove, and a missile screamed through the space where they had been. Proximity alarm shrieked. Another turn, this one so sharp David's vision grayed at the edges. Bronze was in his head, showing him the path, feeling the danger before the sensors registered it. They plunged into the asteroid field. Rock and ice filled the view screen. David flew on instinct and whatever Bronze was feeding him through their growing connection. His reflexes were faster than they should be. He could see better in the dim light between the asteroids. When a boulder the size of his ship tumbled toward them, he knew exactly when to fire the maneuvering thrusters that Cole's ships followed, but they were struggling. One clipped an asteroid and spun out of control. The other two fell back, trying to find a safe approach vector. David allowed himself a moment of hope. Then his engine warning light flashed red. The hull had taken damage from debris. Nothing critical, but the faster-than-light drive was offline. They were stuck in normal space, and Cole knew exactly where they were. Bronze made a distressed sound. David reached over and touched the dragon's head, feeling warm scales under his palm. "We're not done yet," he said. He aimed for a large asteroid cluster and killed the engines, letting momentum carry them into the shadow of a massive rock. The ship went dark, life support to minimum. Every system that might give off a signature powered down. They drifted in silence. Bronze crawled into David's lap, still small enough to fit, but growing every hour. The dragon's warmth soaked through his clothes. David wrapped his arms around the scaly body and waited that Cole's ships prowled through the field. David watched them on passive sensors, afraid to breathe too loud. The hunters had better equipment, better ships, better weapons. But they were looking for a fleeing target, not one playing dead point. One of the ships passed within 100 meters. David could see the scars on its hull, marks from dozens of previous hunts. Bronze trembled but stayed silent. The warmth in David's chest grew stronger, and he realized it was not just warmth. It was connection. He could feel Bronze's fear, and the dragon could feel his determination that we protect each other. David thought that Bronze's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Yes, the word formed in his mind, clear as speech. David's breath caught. The dragon had not just understood him. Bronze had answered. The hunter ship moved away. Its companions followed, spreading out in a search pattern that would eventually cover the whole field. They had time, but not much. David's fingers flew over the controls. The engine was damaged, but the maneuvering thrusters still worked. If he was very careful and very lucky, he could drift to the far side of the asteroid field. There was a patrol depot there, a place where his old friend Lieutenant Amy Cross was stationed. Getting there would take hours. Staying hidden the whole time was nearly impossible. Bronze stood up and placed small clawed feet on the console. The dragon's scales began to glow with inner light, bronze and copper swirling together. Images filled David's head again. Not danger this time, but possibility. Bronze showing him currents of energy that flowed between the asteroids, invisible to normal eyes, but clear as day to dragon senses. If David followed those currents, they would drift naturally, using almost no power. "You are full of surprises," David murmured. The glow from Bronze's scales reflected off his arms, and David saw the bronze patterns on his skin more clearly now. They were not going away. Every hour he spent with the dragon, the marks became more defined. His body was changing in ways he did not fully understand. The council had laws against bonding with skyborn dragons. David was starting to understand why. This was not just friendship or loyalty. This was transformation that he engaged the thrusters in short, careful bursts. The ship began to drift along the path Bronze had shown him. Behind them, Cole's hunters searched in all the wrong places. For now, they were safe. But David knew it would not last. Cole was too good, too experienced. Eventually, the hunter would find them. When that happened, David and Bronze would have to be ready. The crash was not as bad as it could have been. David managed to keep the ship mostly intact when they hit the surface of the small moon. The landing gear crumpled. The hull scraped across rock for 30 meters before they stopped. But they were alive, and the ship's basic systems still functioned. Bronze tumbled across the cabin and bounced off the wall with a yelp. David unbuckled and scrambled to check the dragon. Bronze stood up, shook wings that were now almost large enough for flight, and gave him an annoyed look that said very clearly this was not fun. "Sorry about that," David said. "Next time I'll aim for a smoother moon." Outside, the landscape was gray and lifeless. The moon had minimal atmosphere, enough to breathe, but thin and cold. Mountains of bare rock stretched to the horizon under a sky filled with the gas giant this moon orbited. Beautiful in a harsh way and completely empty of anything useful. David ran diagnostics on the ship. The news was exactly as bad as he expected. The faster-than-light drive needed parts he did not have. The communication system was fried. They had food and water for maybe 2 weeks if he rationed carefully. Bronze nudged his hand with a scaled snout. "We'll figure it out," David said. Trying to sound confident, he stepped outside to assess the damage. The air was thin enough to make him lightheaded. Bronze followed, moving with surprising grace despite the low gravity. The dragon's scales seemed brighter here, reflecting the pale sunlight in ways that hurt to look at directly. David walked around the ship, making mental notes of what needed repair. Most of it was beyond his ability to fix without proper tools and parts. He was so focused on the inventory that he almost walked past the ruins. Bronze stopped and made a sound like a bell. David looked up. Carved into the mountainside, half buried by time and erosion, were structures. Not natural formations, but deliberate architecture. Columns and arches, all covered in symbols that seemed to shift when he looked at them directly. Dragon script. David approached slowly. The symbols covered every surface, telling a story in a language that should have been completely alien to him. But when Bronze came closer, the meanings began to surface in his mind. Not translation exactly, more like memory. The ruins were old, thousands of years old. This place had been a gathering site for skyborn dragons and their human companions, a place of teaching and bonding. The Skysworn had come here to learn, to grow stronger together. "Your ancestors built this," David said. Bronze pressed against his leg, and the flow of understanding increased. He walked through the ruins, reading the story etched in stone. The Skyborn had once numbered in the thousands, spread across the galaxy. They had chosen humans as partners, not servants or masters, but equals. Together, they had protected entire systems, stopped wars, saved species from extinction, but others had grown afraid. The symbols showed what happened next. Betrayal, assassination, entire flights of dragons slaughtered while they slept. The Skysworn hunted down and killed, all because other species feared what humans and dragons could become together, power that could reshape worlds. Bonds that made both human and dragon something greater than either could be alone. The last section of the wall showed a warning. The few surviving Skyborn had gone into hiding, waiting for a time when the galaxy might be ready to accept them again. Their children would know when the moment came. They would feel it in their blood and bones. Bronze sat down and looked up at David with those impossibly wise eyes. The dragon was not just a hatchling. Bronze carried the memories of every ancestor, every Skysworn who had come before. And now those memories were flowing into David through their bond. His arms tingled. The bronze patterns on his skin glowed with the same light as Bronze's scales. David rolled up his sleeves and stared. The patterns were beautiful, intricate, like metal embedded under his skin. When he concentrated, they pulsed with warmth. Over the next hours, Bronze began teaching him, not with words, but with experience. How to sense the air currents that dragons rode. How to feel danger before it arrived. How to move with speed that should have been impossible for a human body. The bond was changing him, rewriting parts of his biology to match Bronze's nature. David practiced in the ruins, jumping between broken columns with reflexes he had not possessed a week ago. His muscles felt different, denser, and stronger. His senses were sharp enough to hear Bronze's heartbeat from across the clearing. Bronze grew too. Now the size of a large dog, the dragon's wingspan had extended to nearly 3 meters. The hatchling could glide short distances, learning flight through trial and error. Every failed attempt made David wince in sympathy, feeling the jarring impacts through their connection. They trained together as the hours passed. David teaching Bronze patience and strategy. Bronze teaching David to trust instinct over thought. Two completely different species becoming something unified. On the second day, David found a spring of clean water bubbling from beneath the ruins. His supplies would last longer than expected. They had time, but not enough that on the third day the sky changed. Ships appeared in orbit, too many to count. David's stomach dropped as he recognized the lead vessel's profile. Cole had found them, and he had brought friends. Landing craft began their descent. Bronze roared, a sound that shook the ground and sent cracks racing through nearby rocks. No longer the frightened chirp of a hatchling, but the challenge of a predator. The dragon had grown powerful during their time in the ruins, and the transformation was not finished. David checked his weapon, a simple energy pistol meant for scaring off wildlife. It would be useless against Cole's mercenaries. But the bronze patterns on his arms glowed brighter, and he felt Bronze's fierce determination merge with his own. They had come to this moon broken and fleeing. They would leave it as something the galaxy had not seen in 1,000 years. The first landing craft touched down at the edge of the ruins. Armored figures emerged. Weapons ready. Cole's voice boomed across a loudspeaker. David Reed, you are surrounded. Surrender the dragon and yourself. This is your only warning. David stepped out from behind a column. Bronze landed beside him with a heavy thud, wings spread wide, scales gleaming like polished metal. Come and take us, David said. The bronze patterns on his skin blazed with light, and for the first time in a millennium, a Skysworn stood ready to fight. Rendix Cole stepped off the landing craft wearing armor that probably cost more than David's entire ship. The mercenary was tall, scarred, and moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a hunt. Behind him, a dozen soldiers spread out in formation, their weapons trained on David and Bronze. You have caused me considerable inconvenience, Cole said. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. 3 days of pursuit, damage to one of my vessels. And now I find you hiding in ruins that make my scanners go haywire. You should leave, David replied. The bronze patterns on his arms pulsed with heat. He could feel Bronze's mind touching his, sharing strength and courage. Cole laughed. Leave? Do you have any idea what that dragon is worth? A single scale from a Skyborn can power a ship for decades. The heart scale alone would make me wealthy beyond measure. He gestured to his soldiers. Take them both. Alive if possible. The soldiers advanced. Bronze roared, and the sound carried power that went beyond noise. David felt it in his chest, in his bones. The ruins trembled. Loose stones fell from ancient columns. Then everything happened at once. The soldiers fired their weapons. Energy nets spread through the air, designed to tangle and subdue. David moved without thinking, his body responding faster than conscious thought. He dove left, rolled, came up running. The nets missed by centimeters. Bronze launched into the air, wings beating hard. The dragon was not fully grown yet, but already deadly. Superheated air poured from Bronze's mouth, forcing soldiers to scatter. Their armor protected them, but the ground where they had been standing glowed red. David fired his pistol. The shots were precise, taking out weapon systems and leaving the soldiers unharmed. His old conservation training had taught him to disable poachers without killing them. That lesson served him now. A soldier came at him with a shock baton. David sensed the attack before it landed, Bronze's aerial perspective merging with his own awareness. He sidestepped, grabbed the soldier's arm, and used the man's momentum to throw him into two of his companions. They went down in a tangle of limbs and armor. More nets fired from different angles. Bronze swept down and grabbed David by the shoulders, powerful claws digging into the fabric of his jacket. The dragon lifted him into the air just as nets crisscrossed the space where he had been standing. They flew together, clumsy and desperate but effective. Bronze was learning flight in the middle of combat, and David was learning to trust completely in the dragon's instincts. Cole watched from a safe distance, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled out a device that made David's blood run cold. Sonic Disruptor, military grade, designed specifically for taking down large creatures by attacking their nervous systems. Enough games, Cole said. He aimed the device at Bronze and fired. The sound was beyond hearing, a frequency that bypassed ears and went straight to the brain. Bronze shrieked in agony and tumbled from the sky. David fell with the dragon, their bond carrying the pain back and forth between them until he could not tell where his suffering ended and Bronze's began. They hit the ground hard. David tried to stand, but his legs would not work. His vision swam. The sonic disruptor was killing Bronze, and through their connection, it was killing him too. He could feel the dragon's heart struggling, wings twitching uselessly. Cole walked closer, the disruptor still active. Fascinating. The bond is even stronger than the old text suggested. When the dragon dies, you will die with it. David's hand scrabbled across the rock, searching for his fallen weapon. His fingers closed around something else instead. A piece of the ruins, carved with dragon script. The stone was warm, almost alive. Through fading consciousness, he heard Bronze's voice in his mind. One word, desperate and fierce. Together, David pressed the carved stone to his chest. Bronze's scales began to glow, brighter than ever before. The bronze patterns on David's skin answered with their own light. The pain from the sonic disruptor was still there, but something else rose to meet it. Ancient power, sleeping in the ruins for 1,000 years, woke up. The bond between human and dragon was not just emotional or mental. It was physical, written into the very structure of reality. And when that bond was threatened, it defended itself. David felt his body change. Scales shimmered beneath his skin. His bones strengthened. The sonic frequency that had been tearing him apart suddenly found no purchase. He was not entirely human anymore, and the weapon was calibrated for baseline biology. He stood up. Cole's confident expression cracked. Impossible. Bronze stood too, shaking wings that now crackled with energy. The dragon was no longer just a hatchling. The ancient power flowing from the ruins had accelerated growth, pushed evolution forward in moments instead of years. David looked at his hands. They were his hands, but also not. The bronze patterns had spread, covering his arms, his chest. When he moved with dragon speed. Last chance to leave, he said. His voice carried harmonics it had not possessed before, echoes of Bronze's roar. Cole raised the sonic disruptor again. David crossed the distance between them faster than the eye could follow and crushed the device with his bare hand. Metal crumpled like paper. The mercenaries stumbled backward. His soldiers, seeing their leader's weapon destroyed and their target transformed into something from ancient nightmares, began to retreat. Bronze spread wings that now spanned 5 meters. The dragon took a breath, and for a moment David thought Bronze would incinerate them all. But the dragon held back, showing mercy they had not earned. Go, David said. Tell whoever hired you that the dragon is not for sale. Tell them the Sky Sworn have returned. Cole ran. His soldiers followed, scrambling back to their landing craft. Engines fired up in panic. Within minutes, the ships were lifting off, fleeing back to orbit. David and Bronze stood together in the ruins, both transformed, both alive. The battle was over, but the sky above them suddenly filled with new ships. Dozens of them, bearing the symbol of the Galactic Council. Bronze growled low in his throat. David put a hand on the dragon's neck, feeling scales that were now warm metal. Different kind of fight, he said quietly. The council ships descended, and David knew their real trial was about to begin. The council chamber was designed to make people feel small. David sat in a restraint field that hummed with energy, keeping him from moving more than a few centimeters in any direction. Above him, the council representatives sat in a curved arrangement that put them literally above the accused. 7 species, each more ancient than humanity, each regarding him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Bronze was somewhere else in the facility. Separated from the dragon, David felt like half of himself was missing. The bond stretched between them, thin and painful. He could sense Bronze's distress, the dragon's roars echoing through corridors of the massive station. David Reed, the lead counselor, said. She was a Viridian, tall and crystalline, her voice like wind chimes. You stand accused of illegal bonding with a protected species, possession of dangerous biological weapons, unauthorized access to restricted evolutionary capabilities. How do you plead? Not guilty, David said. His voice came out steady despite the fear that a different counselor, this one resembling a massive insect, clicked in disapproval. The evidence is clear. The bond markers on your skin, the physiological changes. You have violated laws that exist for the protection of all species. I saved a dying hatchling from poachers, David replied. Since when is that a crime? Since the creature you saved is a skyborn dragon, the Viridian said. The last time your species bonded with theirs, they nearly conquered the galaxy. That's not what happened. The voice came from the entrance. David turned as much as his restraints allowed. Lieutenant Amy Cross walked into the chamber, Her uniform crisped despite having traveled across 3 systems to get here. Behind her walked an elderly counselor David did not recognize, leaning heavily on a walking staff. The Viridian counselor frowned. "This is a closed proceeding. I am invoking my right as a military witness," Amy said. "I have served with David Reed. I can speak to his character." The elderly counselor moved to her seat with slow dignity. "And I am invoking my right as council historian. If we were to judge this human, we should at least know the true history we claim to enforce." Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Viridian looked annoyed but nodded. "Very well. Lieutenant Cross, you may speak." Amy stood at attention. "David Reed is one of the most decent people I have ever known. Before he became a cargo hauler, he worked in wildlife conservation on Earth. He risked his life dozens of times to protect endangered species from poachers and habitat destruction. He has never acted with violence except in defense of those who could not defend themselves. Noble character does not change the facts," the insect counselor said. "The bond is formed. The human has been transformed. He is now a weapon. Show them." Bronze's voice echoed in David's mind, weak from distance but clear. "Show them what we are." David closed his eyes. Through the bond, he reached for Bronze. The dragon reached back. Even separated by walls and energy fields, they found each other. Images flooded the chamber. David did not know he was projecting until he heard gasps from the counselors. Through their shared consciousness, he showed them everything. The moment he found Bronze dying in the snare. The terror in the hatchling's eyes. The decision to help despite knowing the consequences. Days of healing, of learning to trust each other. The connection that grew not from domination, but from mutual respect. He showed them the ruins and the history written there. Not the version the council taught, but the truth. Skysworn had been protectors, not conquerors. They had given their lives to save others, asking nothing in return. The elderly historian watched with tears running down her face. "Yes," she whispered, "this is what we lost. This is what we destroyed out of fear." The projection faded. David slumped in his restraints, exhausted. The chamber was silent. Finally, the Viridian spoke. "Even if your intentions were pure, the law exists for a reason. The bond between human and skyborn creates power that cannot be controlled. Cannot be controlled, or cannot be controlled by you." David asked, "Is this really about safety or about maintaining power?" The insect counselor stood. "You dare accuse this council. Let him speak," the historian said. Her voice carried authority that silenced the others. "For once, let us hear truth instead of comfortable lies." David met the Viridian's crystalline gaze. "You are afraid that if humans and dragons bond again, we will challenge your authority. You have kept both our species suppressed for 1,000 years, because together we represent something you cannot predict or control. But I'm not your enemy. Bronze is not your enemy. We just want to protect those who need protecting." "Fine words," the Viridian said. "But words change nothing. The law is clear." A roar shook the station. Bronze had broken free from whatever containment they had tried to use. David felt the dragon's rage and desperation through their bond. The energy field around him flickered as Bronze's power interfered with the station systems. "Stop," David sent through the bond. "I am okay. Stop." But Bronze was beyond reason. The dragon had been separated from him, caged, and treated as an object instead of a person. All the trauma from the hunters, all the fear and pain, came flooding out. The chamber doors exploded inward. Bronze landed in the center of the room, wings spread wide, scales blazing with inner fire. The dragon was magnificent and terrifying, no longer a hatchling, but a young adult radiating power. Security forces rushed in with weapons raised. "No, David shouted. Do not shoot. Please." Bronze moved to stand between David and the weapons. The dragon's body language was clear. "Touch my human and die." The elderly historian stood up slowly. She walked down from her seat, moving past security guards who looked uncertain. She approached Bronze without fear. "Hello, little one," she said softly. "I knew your ancestors. I fought beside them when I was young, before the purges. I watched them die protecting those who would later betray them. Bronze's head lowered. The dragon sniffed the old counselor carefully. I voted against the purges, she continued, her voice breaking. I tried to stop it. I failed. She turned to face the other counselors. This human saved a dying child. The dragon chose to bond with him freely. They have harmed no one except those who attacked them first. And we sit here, judging them for daring to be what we once celebrated. The Viridian counselor looked at Bronze, at David, at the historian. Her expression was unreadable. Release him, she said finally. We will vote. The vote took 3 hours. David sat with Bronze in a waiting room while the council deliberated. The dragon had calmed down, but refused to let David out of sight. Bronze's head rested in his lap, eyes half closed, a constant rumble of contentment vibrating through the scaly body. Amy brought them food and water. She sat down across from them, studying the bronze patterns that now covered most of David's visible skin. You look different, she said. I feel different, David admitted, but also more like myself than ever before. Does that make sense? Not really, but I have seen stranger things. She smiled. Whatever happens, you did the right thing. The door opened. The elderly historian entered, looking exhausted but somehow lighter than before. The council has reached a decision, she said. You should come. They walked back to the chamber. This time David was not restrained. Bronze walked beside him, wings folded, acting with dignity that belied the dragon's young age. The Viridian counselor stood. David Reed, after extensive debate, the council has decided to allow your bond with the skyborn dragon to continue. Relief flooded through David, so strong his knees almost buckled. However, the Viridian continued. There are conditions. You must prove that the Skysworn can serve the greater good. Reports have reached us of illegal hunting operations in the Outer Rim territories. Species are being driven to extinction for profit. We want you to stop them. David looked at Bronze. The dragon's eyes gleamed with understanding. You are giving us a mission, David said. We are giving you a chance, the historian replied. Prove that Skysworn can be what they once were. Protectors, not conquerors. Save those who cannot save themselves. The insect counselor clicked in annoyance. And if you fail, or if you abuse this power, the consequences will be severe. We understand, David said. Bronze nodded, the gesture almost human. Over the following weeks, David and Bronze prepared for their new role. The council provided a ship, better than David's old cargo hauler, but not luxurious. They provided information on the hunting operations, coordinates, and suspected locations. Bronze grew rapidly, approaching full size. The dragon was now large enough that David could ride on the scale back, though it still felt strange and wonderful every time. Their bond deepened with each passing day. They could communicate without words, sense each other's thoughts and feelings across distances. The bronze patterns on David's skin had stabilized. They were permanent now, marking him as something unique in the galaxy. Not quite human, not quite dragon, but Skysworn. Their first mission took them to a jungle world on the edge of council space. Reports indicated poachers were harvesting rare birds for their feathers, killing entire flocks. The local government was too corrupt or too underfunded to stop it. David and Bronze arrived at night. They found the poacher camp using Bronze's enhanced senses. The dragon could smell the fear of captive animals from kilometers away. They landed silently in the forest canopy, planning their approach. Remember, David said quietly, we stop them, we do not kill them. Bronze huffed smoke, but agreed. The dragon had a fierce protective instinct, but also understood mercy. They struck fast. David disabled the power generators while Bronze freed the caged birds. The poachers woke to find their equipment destroyed and their prisoners gone. When they tried to flee, Bronze blocked their path with a wall of fire. David stepped into the firelight, bronze patterns glowing on his skin. You have two choices, he said. Turn yourselves into local authorities, or I let my friend here decide your fate. Bronze roared for emphasis. The poachers chose surrender. Over the following months, they completed mission after mission. Each time, they saved creatures that could not save themselves. Each time, they showed mercy to those who had shown none. Word spread across the galaxy. The Sky Sworn had returned, and they were nothing like the monsters of fearful legends. Other dragons began to appear. Bronze sensed them first, distant calls across the stars. Skyborn who had been hiding for generations, waiting for a sign that it was safe to emerge. They came slowly, cautiously, but they came, and some of them bonded with humans. David met others like himself. A woman named Rachel who had bonded with a silver dragon after rescuing it from a lab. A young man called Wei who found his dragon partner injured in a mining accident. Each bond was unique, but all shared the same foundation of mutual respect and protection. They were not many, not yet, but they were growing. 6 months after the trial, David stood on a cliff edge watching Bronze fly. The dragon soared through clouds with effortless grace, joy radiating through their bond. Other dragons flew nearby, bronze and silver and gold, their human partners watching from the ground. Amy visited, bringing news from Council Space. The hunting operations in the Outer Rim had decreased dramatically. Species that had been endangered were starting to recover. The galaxy was taking notice. "You did it," she said. "You proved them wrong." David shook his head. "We just showed them what was always true, that protecting others does not require conquest, that strength can be gentle, that bonds built on trust are stronger than those built on control." Bronze landed beside them with a thud that shook the ground. The dragon had reached full size now, magnificent and powerful. But when Bronze looked at David, the expression was still that of the frightened hatchling he had saved from a snare. David climbed onto Bronze's back. The dragon's scales were warm under his hands, familiar as his own skin. "Ready?" Bronze's voice asked in his mind. "Always," David replied. They launched into the sky together. Below them, other Sky-Sworn pairs took flight, following their lead. The sky that had once belonged only to dragons now welcomed humans as well. Not as conquerors or masters, but as family. David had protected a baby dragon from hunters. In return, the sky had recognized him as one of its own. The bond had changed him, transformed him, given him purpose he had never imagined. But more than that, it had brought him home. Bronze's thoughts merged with his own as they flew higher, chasing the horizon. They had work to do, creatures to protect, wrongs to right. The galaxy was vast, and there was suffering in every corner. But they were not alone anymore. The Sky-Sworn flew together, and their roars echoed across the stars like promises, promises of protection, promises of justice, promises of hope. The hunt was over. The real journey was just beginning.